Salve omnes, and welcome to Acroasis XXXVIII, or video 38. And today we're going to be talking about third declension adjectives. So, let's take a look. So first, let's review what are adjectives again. Remember, they modify a noun, they agree in gender, number, and case, and this does not mean that they agree in declension, which is very, very important to remember, especially when we're going to be dealing now with third declension adjectives as well as first, second declension adjectives. Now, for second declension adjectives were the ones that we recognized by the us, au pattern or the ar, pattern. Whichever one we saw that was how we remembered it was an adjective. We saw three patterns. One ended in us or ar, the next one ended in a, and the last one ended in And of course, that was the masculine, feminine, and neuter endings respectively. So now, let's take a look at what a third declension adjective is going to look like. Now think for a minute about the third declension. So ponder what you think that nominative ending might look like, or if there will be a significant nominative ending. So let's take a look. Now, there are different patterns. You can either see ISE showing up, so you see two forms of a word. You might see three forms where the first one is wonky, the next one's IS, and the next one's E. Or you might see a single word followed by a labeled genitive form. Now, this is really just because there's always three forms. It's just whether or not the book decides to write them more than once because it's the same. Because if you think about it, the single form is really just the same form three times, the first masculine, the second feminine, the third's neuter. And then with the ISE pattern, it's just IS twice, first masculine, second feminine, and then the E is the neuter. And then with the one that has three forms, the blank ISE, the blank is the masculine, the IS is the feminine, and the E is the neuter. So again, it's still three forms, it's just you're going to have a variation. So with how it's going to be presented to you based on the book not wanting to repeat, or the dictionary in general. This is just how you can see it. So the last form is neuter. The first two are masculine, feminine. It's always the rule. So third declension is going to use the I stem endings that we learned previously. However, the ablative I ending is going to actually show up for all three genders. So this is going to be more of a common pattern that you see as we start working with adjectives more and more in the third declension. So now let's talk about how to modify a noun properly now that we have these two adjective types, because they operate the same way. Nothing's changing with how they operate. The only difference is one's going to use one set of endings, the other's going to use a different set of endings. And when you combine that with a noun, sometimes it can get a little tricky. So this is a step-by-step guide to help you always have success with modifying nouns and picking adjectives. So the first step is to identify the noun in question's case, number, and gender according to the declension of that noun. So write it down, because the next step is to forget that word that you just looked at entirely. Doesn't matter what declension it was, it doesn't matter what ending you just looked at. All you have to pay attention to is the case, number, and gender that you wrote down. Okay? The next step is to identify what adjective you're working with. Is this a 1-2 adjective, or is it a third declension adjective? Remember, 1-2 adjectives use the us, or the ar, pattern. Third declension adjectives can use a variety of patterns, but for the most part, you're going to see either the same form over and over again with the genitive ending to show you the stem, or you're going to see an ISE ending. The next one is to find the case, number, and gender that you wrote down in that adjective's chart. So, once you've done that, simply add that ending to the adjective and then write it next to the noun, and then you're done. That's it. Seems simple, but sometimes we really want those endings to be exactly the same, and it doesn't always work that way. So let's take a look at some examples. We're going to try and say for the dirty dogs, right? So to say for the dirty dogs, first we're going to need to think about what's the word for dog. Remember, it's canis, where we get the word canine. Canis, canis, that's a third declension word. So Canis canis, which is masculine meaning dog, and then we're going to use sordidus, sordida, sordidum, which means dirty. Now, for the dirty dogs means we have to make it, it's going to be plural and it's going to be dative, right? So we have to be something canibus. So canibus is what we're working with. That's what we need to modify with the word sordidus, sordida, sordidum. So the first step, step 1, canibus, ends in ibus. That makes it dative, it's plural, and it's masculine. Step 2, what noun? What ending? I don't remember what it was. Completely irrelevant now. All I need to remember is dative, plural, masculine. Okay? Step 3, look at my adjectives. Sordidus, sordida, sordidum. It has the us, pattern, so this is a 1-2 adjective. It's going to use first and second declension. So, step 4, what is the dative, plural, masculine for a 1-2? Well, look in first and second declension. Where do you see dative plural? And the answer is is for them, for all of the genders actually. So the next is we just add is to the stem, sordid. So sordidis canibus. That is how we say for the dirty dogs. So, which we've done. We've done this before already. So now let's take a look of how to say of the fierce girl. So, puella, puellae, feminine girl, and acer, acris, acre, keen, severe, and fierce. So, acer, this is our new third declension adjective, right? So, to say of the fierce girl, we're going to use puellae. And now the first step will be, what is puellae exactly? That is the genitive, it's the singular, and it's feminine, okay? So, genitive, singular, feminine. Step 2. What noun are we modifying again? I totally forgot, right? Yeah, we're not remembering what that is. We just need to remember genitive, singular, and feminine, right? So, step 3, take a look at acer, acris, acre. We know this is a third declension adjective because it's using this 3 forms, but none of them follow that pattern of the us, or the r, It's ending, it has an is and an e. That's obviously third declension, right? So, to figure out what the stem is for this, just like you would do for a third declension noun, you look at the genitive. If you don't have a genitive, well, hey, take a look at the second and third form of the adjective that we have here. Acer, that's that blank ending. You have no idea what that could be, right? But acris, you know it ends in is, right? Because remember back to that previous slide where we had is as that ending, and then the third one was e. All you have to do is take off the is or e, and then you have the stem. Okay? Simple. Step 4, we need to find out what is genitive and what is singular feminine in third declension. Well, that's is. So all we have to do is add is to the stem of acer, acris, which is acre. So acris, puellae is how we say of the fierce girl. So the same process is used for both of these adjectives. And if you follow this step-by-step process, it will take a little bit of time, but again, it's going to make it so that you have no errors at all whatsoever, and that's the important part. So now let's take a look at some adjective uses. Most of these are recaps because we've been using them already throughout the year, but just so you have them in one place in your notes, it's nice and useful. Essentially, the rules never ever change in adjectives. They're always going to agree in G and C with whatever they're modifying, and they're always going to translate as if they were adjectives. It's just how they're understood within that translation. It's going to change. So first, we have the attributive function, or rather, the normal use. What an adjective does, modifying a noun. So for example, the brave men, fortes weary. The next one is the predicate adjective, which we see with sum and other linking verbs, like the men are brave, fortes sunt weary. Fortes is still modifying weary. In fact, they're still in the same form. But instead we have this linking verb that's in the middle, kind of like making it a predicate instead of part of the subject part. Then you have the substantive, which stands in for that implied noun. So if I'm feeling a little lazy and I just want to say, fortes instead of fortes weary, maybe I'm running out of room on my paper, so I could just write fortes, and I would understand that means brave men or people. The objective complement. This one's, we've seen it, you've done it, we just haven't placed a name to it yet. and that is when you have adjectives that are used in apposition. So, they made men brave. So, fecerunt fortes viros. They made men brave. So that concludes this video. Make sure you fill in your Google form and bring any questions that you have to class. We'll be doing a lot of activities with this in class as well as going over it quickly again. Until then, valete omnes.